yeah, before we even meet the customer, it's about what you put out there, what you present to the world, and who you're associated with. I've been speaking to BIKBI, and so for installers being associated with something at an institution, it says a lot about who you are, and that's a start point before the customer even speaks to you.
I'd like to say one of the things is it's about what goes right and remembering what's gone right. You're not always focusing on what went wrong. So that was my first thoughts. How do you? Every time you do a project, you at the end of it, you want to find out what it's.
If you focus on the positives, making those changes that it minimises anything going wrong, or you look at towards positivity.
But let's try and find out what those words, see what happens when it's on the screen. So one of the ways I work differently from other people is I have a very clear conversation on poke the clients literally, poke their brains out to get them to think what they really, really want. So I often push them into design corners, or I make suggestions for changes to the architecture. Even small things like the position of a window or the inclusion of French doors. Funny enough, the inclusion of French doors is one of the nicest things you can do for anybody. You never get a client coming back and saying, I wish you didn't put those French doors in. French doors give you access to the outside in a way that nothing else does. So please, let's have some more French doors. I know these sound silly, these points, but they really make for a good end result. And there are some things that aren't perfect. You can say, well, at least I gave you some good advice. At least you've got your feels more connected to the garden, say.
I find a lot of customers, when I approached them, I knew what they needed. When you walked into the room, you knew what was going wrong, you knew how they lived their life, you knew how to make these changes, but the happier customers I always found was when I did make changes. When we really take lots of kitchens, some people, they have a kitchen and it's whatever, it's a wooden kitchen, whatever. And then most installation companies are designers who want to just replicate what's there. And I always found that if we can turn this whole thing upside down, wow, it's amazing how many times we did that. And the customer suddenly felt like they had a new kitchen and you replicate what's already there. And they did.
You've got to connect, find that sort of positive experience, little things.
Yes, and find more work for them.
So the big thing though is ultimately doing what I call a design proposal. And I've been criticised by the industry over the years for charging for that. Because I couldn't find a single way in which you would do a lot of work and thoughtful drawings without, in the end, it taking too much time for you to do for you. And also, people then take my drawings, just copy them, and give them to another company. So I made an absolute determination decision about 20 years ago. But even if I wasn't going to charge a lot, I was going to charge something. And I think there's been a very gradual shift, certainly amongst maybe the public.
Yeah, there's that conversation.
I think even some hands now, even accountants I think are now refusing to let drawings go without some kind of deposit. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I've seen that within the sheds, that they really keep control of what we have. So that is what happens. People just go out and just replicate it, there's no work put into it, and they just give them it at a cheaper cost.
Yeah, and I think once people are paying a bit of money, they're more likely to pay attention and value what you're saying. So it's not all about it. It does reduce.
And that's a skill. That's just a skill to learn how to market that, how to put that across. Yeah. Which isn't easy. First time you're going to push back. People don't want that, but if they're pushing back, maybe they're not your customer. Not everybody can be your customer.
Yeah, maybe that's.
And it's someone coming to value that you are willing to pay. And if you go ahead, you can take that off.
Well, of course you can. Yeah.
So that's not just way of marketing.
So we did very detailed design. So I just want to talk about one project we did in East Finchley. Quite a marginal client in some ways. He was actually he was a demonstrator cook, and he was also an inventor of recipes for various different brands. And he wanted this kitchen for his own use, but he was aware of it. He wasn't over ambitious about what he wanted in terms of cooking facilities, and I really like that because that makes it easier to design in many ways. And here's his basis. It's a terraced house in East Finchley, and this is what there is already. It's got a little bit of old world charm. I think it was built in about 1905. And what we did was we laid the layout on tape on the floor. Quite often we don't do that. But you know what? I wish we did it more. I think it's a really nice thing to do.
Yeah. obviously you give the open space there that, to be able to lay it out. Anytime when I was in a kitchen, well, most installers, the kitchen's there, so it's very difficult. So I would spend time with the customer to try to get them to visualise what they were going to have. As much as we could lay it out in that way, it's trying to get their head around where the oven was
So
going.
did you ever do a layout sort of a bit like that?
We didn't plan it out because the kitchen's already there and we're just going to turn up and rip it out and install it at that time. But I would physically go around and make sure that they knew, try to get them to get an idea as to how this was going to work for them and why what we were proposing, how that was going to change things for them and how the flow of the room was going to work better and cooking over here is we're not getting.
So you were doing a designer's job there?
Absolutely. Because we would go back to the stores and we would say, no, we need this. Because we see the end result.
Yeah.
And we're with the customers.
I like that crossover. I think that's interesting.
Well, it is. The PMA has done a lot of studies about that, about how the influence of the installer has on the customer as to what the customer actually buys in the end. And that just resonated with me so much because that was my history of I was absolutely push the customer in the direction. And so then to do that, I kind of had to have half a clue of what I was talking about, and I couldn't just blag it. So you learn from what worked for customers and what didn't. Obviously, I'm not a designer.
But if I was an uptight designer, I'd be very cross about that.
Well, if you would learn, the level of designers I'm working with, it's not you, Tommy.
No, but it's really nice when you get that kind of crossover. I really like it. Anyway, so I think it's particularly relevant to try and do that when you've got very tight spaces, you're trying to do a lot with it. And I do think that doing this thing is a really helpful educational process, because afterwards you can get into a lot of trouble. They can't say that
when something's unexpected, or you have no clue.
they say they haven't got enough room to walk by, whatever it is. And another little thing before we go into through my own pictures is I think this is a real problem with a lot of kitchen companies, is they're stuck in cabinetry. Don't get stuck in cabinetry. Think about all the other materials you can use. Think about the components you can use, and particularly try and use more metalwork connectors, because the less it's meant to be strong and small in scale, and particularly for things like hanging gantries, it really makes a difference to make it more lighter in weight.
Yeah.
And indeed for support systems as well.
I think designing, especially in kitchen, across the UK, you look at the mass market, how many actual designers or who's really interested in design. It would be great to see that grow.
And design is much more than just using chipboard, and using panels of wood. It really is. When I look at most of the kitchens and magazines, I just see stuff. Look, it's too much cabinetry, guys. Think about it differently. Think about it as a living space, or something which has got some kind of sense where you can breathe almost. That's why I'm particularly fond of things like working tables or islands which are not boxed in. Why is it most of those islands are so heavy looking? So heavy. Not needed. These are actually some real clients of mine who commissioned an enormous kitchen. We went right at the end to photograph them, and I was absolutely thrilled because I wasn't quite sure what the installers, they really like it, but anyway, you can see their response to that, and they become friends. That's the next.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, and I think there is a sort of element about enjoying communication. So I don't know whether it sounds like exactly what you do and why your installations were so much probably easier to manage.
Huge. That relationship was just massive. That was the first thing going in. Just to create that. That's all I really wanted from that first survey, was to make that connection and get them on board.
So did you survey projects and then send it back to the kitchen retailers?
Then we would go back, yeah. So we would go out, we would get the project, we would get the plans, and I would then independently make visits and go see the customer and discuss.
So did you commission the manufacturer to make the cabinetry as well?
No, we were just using.
So you really were acting in a way, a much more proactive way than most installers.
Yeah, but it was important because as much as we were, whether we'd be working with sheds or anything like that to get the work, that was my route in. I mean, I may have been given one project, but I wanted this customer for life. I wanted them to believe in me and to believe in my company. So I need to get my foot in the door. And
is that because we're both insecure people that desperately
need to be loved? I don't know.
Need the love. It might be, you never know. Depends what our wives say. sorry, I just go back to one other thing, and I'm sure that a lot of you experience this, but I have to say, actually, I have become a family therapist by default in some of these projects, because actually, you're spending a lot of money and you're disrupting people's lives. You need to hold their hands more. I've had clients crying. Tell me one of those.
I remember I had this client that was just, I remember walking out at the end of the first day as the husband walked in, and he just walked past Russ guy, and he walked past and he's like, oh, you're still here? And he couldn't believe it because everybody got kicked out of the house. His wife was never satisfied. And we managed to get through the day. But then we got to the next day, it was the next morning we turned up, and the place had been trashed overnight. When we left the kitchen, she did, I don't know what she did, but they trashed the place, and here she is on the ground crying on, oh, we just destroyed her life. Oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like
Have
it.
you ever had a project where you've been basically told halfway through they don't want you back again?
Well, that was on that project. We ended up, we got an installation manager in, and he walked in, "You just leave this to me, I'll sort this." He walked in, in half an hour he was out the door, he was sent, his bags packed.
And what happened?
She was just a psychopath. She just really needed a lot of counselling, and I wasn't qualified to give that counselling. But we've gotten another installer, and between us we managed to get all the way through it. But again, it was at the end of it, we wouldn't get paid. There was no way we were getting paid.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what am I going to do? And so I went to the husband. I knew the husband had a business, and I wrote to the husband. I wrote him a letter and said, look, we are a small business here. We've came in, we've done a great job. There's obviously issues that we have no clue about. What a small business to a small business, you need to see, no, we need paid. And he sent me a business check, and we got paid for the job because he recognised it, something to us. And it's all we do what he had to go home to every night.
I've got too many stories to say about not being paid, which I think all these audience will for several hours, but I'll tell you one nice one, maybe two. One was basically my first time fitting a kitchen for somebody in Hammersmith. The woman who, in this case, she didn't really consult her husband very much because it was her money. Then what happened was, he didn't really want the project done anyway. He was a tax inspector, okay? So you're going to get the picture now. So we do the job, and then I have to, he owes me whatever it was, 5 or 10 grand or something. Then I have to go and, basically go and get paid. And I was waiting for this. Knock on the door. And he answered it. He's smiling. I think that's a good sign. And he said, I'm not exactly going to give you an apology. He said, but what have you done to my wife? And it turns out, he said, she's become so orderly in the kitchen. The kitchen's not a mess anymore. I said, well, that's the point. And he criticised the design for not having enough work surface. He said, it's never going to work. So I still didn't really know what I was going to be paid on
At the end of that.
And then we went into the sitting room, sat down, and he wrote out a check. And he said, you've done a good job. And I thought that was quite interesting. So actually, we had an effect on their lives in a way that I hadn't really actually thought it would be quite like that. But I honestly don't think if he had seen that, presumably it was his money at this point, his paying the remains.
But it's amazing how many jobs you walk into at the beginning that you're walking into conflict before anything's even. You haven't got a chance to do anything nice.
Yeah.
They're already at loggerheads, and the wife wants one thing, the husband wants something else, and the husband doesn't want it at all. And you're walking into an atmosphere, and you're like, oh, this is going to be hard. And so you just got to try and play it how you see it at the time, but it can be difficult, for sure. And by that time you're committed, you're doing the job, and it's not easy. So family therapy, counsellor, marriage guidance. There's a lot to be an installer.
So maybe that's what we're really doing. You know what? I mean, it's not entirely. It's not. That's some truth in it.
Absolutely. No, it's also wise. It's not everybody that's getting a new kitchen because they need a new kitchen. It's the cover of patching something else up. It's like retail therapy. A bigger version of retail therapy. They're spending money thinking that this is going to make everything okay and this is going to make them happy. And that's not always the case. And so you end up walking in the middle of that.
It sounds like to me there's a bit of an element of a psychologist about it.
No, but I recognise it.
Yeah.
Because I've been with so many customers, you see so many, everybody from all walks of life. being an installer. You're walking into their territory, their home.
Yes, that's interesting.
And that's
Yeah,
the
I
politics
think-
of all
yes.
of that. You're walking into family
Yes,
politics.
that territory is an interesting
And you see
thing.
how some people will treat you, you see how other people
Yeah.
will look down on you as a tradesman.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
navigate
absolutely.
that. But the number one thing is you have to keep them on your side. Because if you lose that job, then it all becomes your fault. I mean, to the showroom, when they sold the kitchen, you're walking in as an installer. If all that went, then that's your fault. That can't happen. So you've got to play the game, and you just very quickly learn who to play, who to work off of, and how to handle it. So yeah, you do become this more than a kitchen fitter, for sure.
I feel almost I don't want to talk about design anymore. But we will, okay. Because you're right, there's so many outside factors that you can actually do an incredible job if someone will get paid.
Yeah. The kitchen's easy, but installing the kitchen's easy. If you just leave your alone to do it, when you
Now
find-
that's what I like to hear, yeah.
It is.
I'm sure it's mentality. It's a very nice thing to say. I suppose that there are some things here which are more designed for, which in some ways aren't really about when things go wrong. But what I do think is wrong is having kitchens that can't be used by every generation. And that's what this original research kitchen here that we put, it's basically where this comes from. Research from Newcastle University and the National Initiative of Aging. We know that when kitchens can be quite divisive places in terms of it can be exclude people. And one of the areas, one of the groups that are excluded are children. Not actually necessarily,
Learning how to cook at a young age,
Old
and being
designer.
involved
Yeah.
at that level.
but one thing we also know is that there's an issue of safety around practical aspects of kitchen use.
I like seeing this multi-generational conversation happening. Obviously, with what I do, my involvement with anti-slip shower trays, and being in North America, this aging in place conversation is huge compared to the UK. Yes, there are a few designers here and there that try to get this conversation going, but it needs to be bigger, it needs to be far bigger, and you see it growing every day in the United States. And so I love seeing that, and as I say, we all need to be educated. People like yourself talking about that, that really helps. And it's not that people don't want to do that, it's just that they've never thought of it. They've never thought about, again, if we did this, my kids could be a lot more involved. It's just
It is
delighting
very-
how people work, how classes work with vision with older people, and just different things.
And actually, that's the original origin of the design was that 4 generations could use it.
Yes.
Because each of these plants move up and down.
Yes.
And height is one of the key things that invites somebody to use it, or invites
But also
the person to
then
sit
with the
at
aging in
age.
place, when people start using their kitchens, it keeps them in their home longer, they're cooking for themselves, that's the whole process. And people will live longer if they're kept in their own homes. That's been proven statistically. And so the more we can do that, the more we can look after this. And fundamentally get it right back to base, right at the beginning. It shouldn't just be designers like yourself coming out with these ideas and then it's the kitchens that we're replacing. Maybe if we could get that conversation bigger and right back to the basics, down to build when we're designing homes, right at the beginning, then we'll see things starting to change.
This is the kitchen I did in Falmouth, or it says some guys on my website. And what you can see in the foreground with this kind of funny shaped flexible table is underneath it has the same shape but for almost like a stool, and small children can stand on it or oldies can sit on it, or it can fold away. And that seems to be again an invitation to get people to participate in cooking or drinking or eating or whatever. And this is it being made in the workshop. And
You
it's
see
really
that,
put in.
I think when you've got kids involved in kitchens, they're far more capable than you give them credit for. In using tools and using knives and it's so true. People think that instantly you hand a knife to a kid and they're going to cut their hand off. And they're actually just
I'll tell you a really nice story. So I was slightly ahead of my elder brother. I had a son at the age of 4. He only had girls. And he decided one Christmas to give my son a set of adult chisels at the age of 4, right? And I was pretty tolerant as a dad, and pretty much, as you can guess, open to the idea. But even I was quite freaked out about letting my 4-year-old son use the electricity, and it's going to be this house. And I built a workshop then about this height. It's in our hallway in a big house we were renting. And so, he thought about it. It's a good present. And my wife, I don't think she actually quite realised what was going on. We let him use it. And let me tell you, he didn't cut his hands until he was about 18 when he went on some kind of camping weekend with his school friends and got pissed. So, there's something about trusting kids and tools, I think. You've got to do it. I think we'll just skip this. It's too serious for the end of the day. So I just jotted down a whole bunch of rather funny things that could go wrong. But do you want to pick out one of those?
Well, all of these things just, if we look at, just grabbing their length of installation. Length of installation comes down to, again, using professionals for installation. I know, I could tell you when I was installing kitchens, I could take it down to the hour. I knew how long that job was going to take down to the hour. And that's what happens, you get that when you use professionals, someone who's, the repetition, you just learn how long something's going to take, then allowing for different factors to come into it. You've already, the wobbly walls, poolside surveying, well, you've done a great survey and you know all the pitfalls that are ahead of you. You get that by using a professional. When you don't use a professional, that's when all these problems start occurring. Things come out of the woodwork because they don't have the education to know what to look for. So all of these things it's definitely the key. Again, I jump back to the BIKBDI and using associations like that to find professionals.
So we covered most of the previous slide, but I think there's a few here that you might want to pick up on. Cherry pick one of those if you think is particularly relevant. Because I've got a couple of favourites. I'll tell you what they are in a minute.
Wall covers. Sometimes I'm seeing too many wall covers that hit you in the eye, and
that is one of my favourites.
Yeah,
that's why I hate fitting wall covers.
When you look at mass marketing kitchens, it's about and the customer. They just want as much as they can get in. Is it because, again, I see the difference in North America to here, and kitchens are smaller, and they're smaller in that they tend to be a separate room. Whereas in North America, you've got the dining room, the kitchen, and a living area. It all tends to be a bit more open, which makes the kitchen feel a bit bigger, a bit more social. But it's all really about, that's what my experience was about, getting as many covers as you can.
There's quite a lot of things. So when I first developed the unfitted kitchen in 1986 with Smallbone, I had to do 3 prototypes for each of the directors. So I've got to pass a kind of litmus test. And the first one was for the managing director and his wife, who was the sales director. And we did an unfitted kitchen design, and she couldn't understand why the sink didn't go to the wall, and she didn't get quite all of it, but she was charming and she was open. And then she said, right, well, we're now going to get our team to design a fitted kitchen in exactly the same space. We're going to measure up the amount of storage in an unfitted kitchen versus a built-in one. And I'm grinning here like mad, because actually, I was staggered by this. There's more storage with an unfitted kitchen. And I had to work out why. And that is really fascinating. And part of the reason is because with a fitted kitchen, you've got a long counter, then you've got a gap, you've got your narrow cupboards against the wall. But if you just imagine hacking off, say, 5 foot of that and putting in one massive great walk-in pantry, you've got a storage game. In fact, you've got such a storage game that you can actually have a bit of space. So as you go around the kitchen,
100%.
Is that right? Is it just
because that changed my life changed when, again, North America obviously has got a big impression on me, but when I moved there, suddenly our kitchen had this pantry, and it just changed everything, because that's where everything was. So therefore, what we had in the kitchen, if you've got 90% of people walking to you, could they have this in their kitchen? The first thing is, we're not going to put anything. But if you've got this,
exactly,
you can't do it, right? But you can.
And I think
and you allow them design they can be more expressive.
So I was trying to look back in history and find out the big difference between British and American kitchens. And on the whole, Americans still obtain their pantries right the way through up to the 60s. Then as the fitted kitchen brigade began to win over American consumers, the pantry started to be less important. But even now in America, they have slightly bigger homes, so the likelihood of there being a pantry is much higher. But broadly speaking, we lost it in the 30s, I think, with a massive building program
No,
and much smaller houses, pantries disappear. And I think that's a retrograde.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people for that kind of thing, starting off with, can you put a bank there, and work from there, for sure.
So I'm going to have another hack at fitted kitchens before we end up with this slide. So I did an incredibly exciting design for a wonderful couple who made loads of money out of the first tech boom in California. And did the designs, and they were going to have their second honeymoon in Paris. I said, I tell you what, I'll do the designs and I'll meet you in Paris and I'll present you with the designs. And that's exactly what I did. I went to Paris, stayed in the same hotel with them, did the presentation, class absolutely loved it, went home and showed the design to their friends. Big mistake. They saw it and they realised that what had happened was I kind of narrowed down the sort of the amount of kind of work surface to very targeted areas, and the friends couldn't read the design or get it. So basically, their friends said they shouldn't buy the kitchen, and I lost the job, a $200,000 job, probably, I remember. And they were absolutely made as a quiet error because actually what you want is organised space or dedicated work surface. I do think it makes you confused if you've got a long counter and you don't really know where you're doing what.
Really stand on it.
That's not a fitting issue, that's a design issue.
No, we talk about it all the time.
Dishwashers on the floor, I really have a problem with, because the lower shelf is the one you use all the time. Over 100 actions, and you've got to do this all the time. You don't need to do any of that.
I think we should look at hospital cases as to how many bats go out reaching down to the dishwasher. I'm now skilled with the foot that I can open and close it with my foot because my bat went down there, no chance.
Well, it is a very nice end story to that. So somewhere along the line, Fisher and Paykel read some of a chapter in the Art of Kitchen Design when I was having a rant about dishwashers. And they, in 2006, I did a tour of New Zealand and Australia, and one of the sponsors was Fisher and Paykel. And they invited me to their factory, and I went to see one of the factory. Sat next to one of the directors at lunch, and he said, look, I think we have to say thank you to you, because without reading your book, we never would have designed the dishwasher drawer. The dishwasher drawer is often a good solution. But what's really interesting about it is Fisher and Paykel have got the most lethal legal team, and nobody has been able to copy the technology of the way that it's so compact at the back. You can put all your workings within a sort of drawer hack. So there's almost nobody else in the market with a dishwasher drawer.
I vaguely remember you had a tabletop dishwasher, did you not?
Oh, well, that's another story.
That's another one.
Colston. Anybody remember Colston? They designed TV-shaped dishwasher which you could plonk on your draining board. And I was walking around Petersfield Square. I was about, I don't know, I was probably about 11 or 12 years old with my dad. And I saw this in the shop window, and I tried to persuade him to come in. The following weekend, we went back into town to do some food shopping, and he went in there, and I told him how wonderful it was. And very sweetly, he secretly bought it for my mum as a sort of present. And then what happened was that we had a little tiny country cottage in the South Downs. We lived in London during most of the time, but whenever we went on holiday to the South Downs, the Colston would have to come with us. And I wrote this blog on my thing called Machines on Legs, along with some of the funny times we've had with the classes. But the most sweet one really was the Colston on the back of my father's old Rolls. And my job was to carry it with my other brother up the stairs to a very narrow little tiny terraced house in London, onto the Rolls, tie it on because it was just on a flap at the back.
All those days of taking those dishwashers at the back of the Rolls Royce.
It's very eccentric and probably completely pointless, but I think my dad loved the idea of my mum having a dishwasher.
Travelling dishwasher.
Okay, I think we're nearly there. Pick one of those out.
Where are we? Not sure, like, there's no sense of order,
You've probably done most of those.
Long term, looking at kitchens and thinking about how this is going to impact, how things change, styles change. You know, I always remember lots of kitchens would come out with just really in-your-face kitchens, and I was trying to steer. People wanted a wow effect. They wanted, you know, and just in a normal kitchen, I would steer them away from it being the kitchen, and maybe try it different. As I always say, you know, when you've got 3 square meters of tiles there, do whatever you like on that, because it's a lot easier to replace that than to replace a £20,000 kitchen. But just that things where it's fast, I think very careful.
We talked about this whole thing about the role of style and fashion and how people perceive it, because one of the big issues around kitchens is that basically people look into the current magazines and they see what's kind of in play, what the journalists are recommending or what people are doing. And it's often based on quite trivial phenomena. And they're not, a bit like, I suppose, buying fashionable clothes that last for a season. Understandable on one level. But with kitchens, you can't, it's just not responsible.
Well, the clothes, the cost is, high fashion is low cost.
And
But kitchens are,
but there's a very easy solution. Just don't follow one style.
Yeah.
Borrow like mad. Borrow wherever you can find it. Let's have less shaker and more multi sort of referenced styles.
So
let's do 50s, let's do
30s.
30s, let's do rustic or whatever. I can name 100 of those things.
Yeah.
Why do we have to stick with shaker all the time? I mean, I am absolutely sad about it. Because there's so much more life
More to it,
in
yeah.
the design.
For sure.
Okay, this is going on much too long, this case, sorry. So choose one.
High decibels extractors. Here's the thing, that was something that came out of COVID, about suddenly being in a home, and things like extractors and washing machines and dishwashers and the decibels of all of these things suddenly. And I remember that I've worked from home, but that was one of the first things that I became aware of when I started working from home, was all these things that leaked and had noises and tumble dryer that plays a little tune at the end.
Installer 2025 Day 1 has now closed. Please can I ask all visitors to make their way to the exits.
Okay, so we have to do a plug for NEC because Johan is here, but actually it's an incredible piece of kit and it does answer most of those points you've just raised.
Yeah, no, it's real. Noise is really important, just these irritating noises, and it really affects how people feel in the room, for sure.
So this is our last slide, so we've nearly made it on
There we
time.
go.
So this is partly for you, Johan, but no, it's serious. It's a way, we have a responsibility for the environment which we now have to really address. And I think those are the ways we do it, slightly more widely than just purely telling people to have recyclable products. It's got to be thinking right the way across.
I remember doing this right at the beginning. It's a weird way around it that I got to, but so I'm starting off as an installer and I'm trying to make as much money as I can. And at that time I would look at, when I fit the kitchen, if I could actually tile the kitchen as well, that gave me an extra few bob in my pocket if I could do that. But the customers, again, Dundee, working class, there wasn't a lot of money on the go. And so I would often speak to the customers and ask them to put their kitchen, I said, take out a £5 advert in a newspaper or wherever and advertise your kitchen. I said, you will have a landlord that will come along and take it off your hands for £100 and take it away because they're not going to spend money on their student flats or whatever. And so, I was doing that, whatever that was 30 years ago, and asking them to do that for the wrong reasons. It was really so that they suddenly had the £100 that they could pay me to tile their kitchen. That was really what I was trying to help them that way. But really, as I've seen your business grow, and it is, it's really, there's such a waste. The kitchens are just, I've thrown out better kitchens than I've put in at times. And you're like, oh my God, this is just, we've tried to convince the customer, look, why don't you change your utility room at the same time? We'll use this and we'll use it in your utility room. Let's try and save some of this kitchen. But honestly, because sometimes it's just, and you've not got time. You as an installer, I couldn't take the responsibility. I didn't have time to be getting involved in second-hand kitchens. I don't even know if your business existed back then, but but it's just that there's such a waste, and it's just reusing a kitchen again. Absolutely, there's so many great kitchens out there, and just because you're taking it out doesn't mean it should end up in the skip.
So maybe that's a very good note to end on, because actually maybe Helen and your team at Revo are really putting things right. And that is the positive note to, I mean, I'm happy to chat to anybody, so we better.
So that's how anyone else is
But thank you for listening.